And for the first time, she asked him what he needed, not as a worker. He was just a single dad, overworked, underpaid, and invisible to the world that passed him by every single day, but one night. After a company party he wasn't even invited to, he made a decision so small, it should have meant nothing. He offered to drive his drunk boss home. No expectations, no rewards, just decency. But what happened after that ride? What she told him the next morning. It didn't just change his career, it shattered everything he thought he knew about his past, and revealed a secret that had been buried for decades. By the time you finish this story, you'll never look at a quiet man the same way again. Because sometimes, the people we ignore are the ones carrying the most powerful stories of all. He wasn't supposed to be there that night, but life doesn't ask for permission when it wants to change everything. His name was Marcus, a single father, a man juggling 2 jobs, unpaid bills, and the heavy silence of a house where laughter used to live. His mornings started before sunrise. His nights ended long after his son had fallen asleep. Alone, under dim lights, surrounded by bills and quiet prayers. He worked hard, too hard for someone who rarely got noticed. But tonight, he stood outside the company's luxury event, security badge still clipped to his chest, while the executives toasted champagne inside. He wasn't invited, he never was, but when they needed someone to park their cars, clean up, or carry the weight of their mess, Marcus was always called, and he never said no, not because he had nothing better to do, but because he had someone to live for. His son, Jalen, 8 years old, with eyes full of dreams and a heart that still believed superheroes were real. Marcus wasn't trying to impress anyone, he was just trying to survive. As the party faded into drunken laughter and slurred goodbyes, one voice cut through the noise, sharp, familiar, and completely intoxicated. "Marcus, you still here?" It was her, Ms. Langford, his boss. The same woman who barely acknowledged his existence on most days, the same woman who once told him, "You should smile more. It makes people comfortable." She was stumbling, heels in one hand, pride in the other. "I can't drive like this," she muttered, trying to unlock her car with her phone. Marcus didn't say a word. He took her keys gently, opened the passenger door, and helped her in without judgment. He didn't ask for gratitude. He didn't expect recognition. He just did what he always did, what was right even when no one was watching. The city lights blurred past the windshield. She mumbled stories he wasn't supposed to hear about loneliness, broken engagements, and the weight of pretending to have it all together. And Marcus just listened, like he always did, quietly, patiently, because sometimes even the strongest people need to fall apart, just not in front of a crowd. As they pulled into her driveway, she looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. "You're a good man, Marcus," she whispered, eyes glossy, heart exposed. He nodded, said goodnight, and drove off, no agenda, no expectations, just a man doing what most people forgot how to do, show up with integrity. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, Marcus returned to work early, like always, but something was different. People stared, whispered. Some looked at him like he didn't belong, others like they'd just seen him for the first time. He walked into the break room and found a note taped to the coffee machine. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but he knew who it was meant for. Sometimes the people we overlook carry the greatest strength. Last night, someone reminded me of what dignity looks like. I owe him more than a thank you. I owe him a seat at the table. Signed, E. Langford, President. Langford and Associates. The room went silent. Marcus folded the note quietly and walked away, just like he drove her home, with no fuss, with no pride, just quiet strength, but the shift had already begun. That day, he was called into her office not for a warning, but for a conversation. She didn't talk about last night. She talked about leadership, about being seen, about what it meant to carry more than just a title. But as a father, as a man, and Marcus, who had spent years building everyone else's dream, finally spoke. He didn't ask for a raise, he didn't beg for recognition. He simply said, "I just want to make sure my son knows he can hold his head high, that I did something worth remembering." She didn't blink, she didn't mock him, she nodded and extended her hand, Then let's build something together, she said. But while things were changing on the outside, Marcus had no idea what she was really planning. Because what she revealed the next day wasn't just a thank you, it was a decision that would shake the foundation of his entire life, and Marcus wasn't ready, not for what she said, not for what she gave, not for what it would cost him next. Because sometimes, a single drive can lead you down a road that was never meant to be taken, but ends exactly where you were meant to arrive. Marcus sat quietly at his desk the next morning, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that had survived more storms than he ever admitted. He didn't expect anything more from the night before, not praise, not promises. He thought maybe the moment had passed, like most things in his life, seen in silence and forgotten just as quickly, but the office atmosphere was different. There was a tension in the air, not hostile, but thick, like a curtain had been pulled back, and now everyone saw him. Clearly, the whispers weren't mocking. They were curious, respectful, different. Then his phone buzzed. "Please come to the boardroom, immediately. E. Langford." His heart skipped, not out of fear, but because when you've been overlooked for so long, even being called into the room feels like a battle won. Marcus stood, straightened his tie, one of only two he owned, and walked slowly toward the door. The hallway felt longer today, each step a reminder of the journey he had walked, alone in silence with weight on his shoulders no one else had carried. When he entered the boardroom, he saw them, every senior executive, every decision maker, and at the head of the table MS. Langford, her gaze sharper than ever, but softer around the edges. No one spoke. Then she stood. "Before we begin today's meeting," she said, her voice steady, "I need to introduce someone, properly." The room shifted. "This is Marcus Hill, single father, employee of this company for 7 years, and a man whose integrity reminded me last night of the kind of leadership we claim to value but rarely honor." Whispers broke out, but she raised her hand. "When I was too vulnerable to lead myself, he led with humility. When I was lost, he chose to protect my reputation rather than expose it. That's the kind of character that can't be taught in boardrooms or bought with salaries." She paused, locking eyes with Marcus. "I made a decision this morning, and it wasn't out of pity. It was out of clarity. Starting today, Marcus will be transitioning into a new role, assistant operations manager, and he will begin training to join our executive mentorship track." The room froze. Marcus blinked. Assistant manager, mentorship, to executive leadership. Him. It felt like a dream spoken in a language he wasn't sure he was allowed to understand. "I don't expect everyone to agree," she continued. "But I didn't call this meeting for approval. I called it because sometimes the right thing isn't popular, it's just necessary." Marcus didn't know what to say. He didn't even know how to breathe. He felt every pair of eyes on him, some skeptical, some impressed, a few even proud. But in that moment, none of that mattered, because for the first time he felt seen, not as a janitor, not as a fill-in, not as a nice guy, but as a man of worth, a man his son could look up to and say, "That's my dad," and they know who he is. The following weeks moved fast. Paperwork, new suits, training schedules, but something inside Marcus moved slower. He was grateful, deeply, but he was also battling something no promotion could fix: the fear of not belonging. The boardroom was filled with people who knew wine pairings, golf courses, and Ivy League degrees. Marcus knew late fees, second jobs, and the quiet pain of telling his son, "Not this month," at the store. He tried to smile in meetings, tried to nod like he understood their jokes, but deep down, a voice kept whispering, "You're just the guy who drove her home." It haunted him, even when MS Langford praised his ideas, even when one of the VP asked for his input. He still felt like a visitor in a world that wasn't built for men like him. Until one afternoon, as he gathered his notes after a strategy meeting, MS Langford approached quietly. "You're doing well, Marcus," she said, But I can tell you're shrinking to fit in. Don't. He looked at her, unsure how to respond. This company doesn't need another clone in a suit. It needs someone who knows how to lead from experience, from the ground, from truth. That's why I chose you. She paused. And about that night, I wasn't just drunk, I was drowning, and you, without knowing, threw me a lifeline. You didn't just drive me home. You reminded me who I used to be before all the titles. Marcus swallowed hard. There was silence. Then she said the one thing that broke him more than the promotion, more than the praise. You gave me back my dignity. Now I want you to walk in yours. And just like that, something in him healed. He didn't just belong, he was needed. That night, Marcus came home and found Jalen asleep on the couch. Schoolbooks scattered, cartoons still playing. He gently lifted his son, carried him to bed, and whispered, "We're gonna be all right, little man." Then he sat by the window. The same window he used to stare out of, wondering if life would ever change, but now it had, not because he chased power, not because he played politics, but because in one quiet moment, when no one was watching, he chose character over comfort. And it led him to a future he never saw coming. But the story wasn't over, because what Ms. Langford did next wasn't about business. It was about a promise and a secret she had kept hidden for years. One that would change Marcus's past and his future forever. But the story wasn't over, because what Ms. Langford did next wasn't about business. It was about a promise and a secret she had kept hidden for years. One that would change Marcus's past and his future forever. 3 days passed. Marcus had just finished reviewing vendor contracts when a quiet knock tapped on his new office door. It was her, Ms. Langford, again. But this time she didn't walk in with her usual poise. She looked different, softer, nervous, almost afraid. She held something in her hand, a small brown envelope, no markings, no name, just time. Stained edges and a faint perfume that smelled like memory. "Can we talk?" she asked. Marcus nodded. She sat down, handed him the envelope, and took a breath so deep. It sounded like it came from years back. "What I'm about to tell you," she began, "isn't easy, but I owe it to you. I owe it to someone else, too." Marcus opened the envelope slowly. Inside, there was an old photograph. A woman, young and full of light, holding a newborn baby, and beside her, a man Marcus hadn't seen in over 20 years. His breath caught. It was his father. Marcus's hands trembled. He looked up, confused, shaken, unsure what world he had just stepped into. Ms. Langford swallowed hard. "That woman," she said, pointing to the photo, "was my sister." Marcus froze, no words, just questions crashing in his chest. "She died in a car accident when her baby was still young. She was unmarried. My family buried the past instead of facing it. But before she died, she wrote a letter. She made me promise I'd find her son one day." Her voice cracked. "I never knew where to start until I met you." Marcus stared at the photograph again. Everything suddenly felt like it made sense, and like it didn't: his father, her sister, the silence of his past. The emptiness he'd carried, now filled with a name, a face, a secret no one ever told him. "I didn't know at first," she continued, "but when I saw your last name on the employee records, something clicked. I started digging. The timelines matched, the hospital records, the location." Marcus's lips parted, but no words came out. "I didn't just owe you a promotion," she said gently. "I owed you the truth. I owed you a family." Tears built behind his eyes, but he blinked them back. He was used to carrying pain. "But this was something else." "Why now?" he asked, voice quiet. "Because you reminded me who I was raised to be. Because when you drove me home that night, it wasn't just kindness. It was fate showing up and knocking on my door, reminding me of a promise I had buried too long." She reached into her purse and placed the letter on the desk. "I kept this all these years. I think it was meant for you." Marcus picked it up with shaking hands. The paper was fragile, faded, but the words were clear, handwritten in neat, looping ink. To the son I'll never get to raise, if you're reading this, it means someone brave finally did what I couldn't. I want you to know you were always loved. Even when life broke us apart, I never stopped hoping you'd find your way. And when you do, I pray the world gives you everything I couldn't. The tears came now, not just from sadness, but from finally being found, from a silence that had echoed for decades, finally breaking. He didn't say much that day. He walked out of the office, past stunned employees, down the parking lot, and sat in his car for almost an hour, just breathing. Not to calm down, but to feel everything, to let the weight of abandonment, confusion, strength, sacrifice, and now reunion settle in. That night, Marcus sat with his son at the dinner table. Jalen looked up, curious. "Dad, are you okay?" Marcus smiled, eyes still glassy. "You know how I told you superheroes aren't always people who fly." Jalen nodded. "Well, I think we just found another one." Weeks passed, but something had changed in Marcus. Not just his job, not just his title, but the way he walked, shoulders back, eyes forward, not because he was proud, but because he finally knew where he came from, and why he was still standing. MS. Langford. No, Antilles remained at his side. Not just as a mentor, but as the family neither of them thought they still had, and the company. They didn't just get a new operations manager, they got a new culture, one built not on prestige, but on people. One where janitors got noticed, where quiet heroes were given microphones, where stories like Marcus's became the foundation of how the business grew. Months later, Marcus stood at a podium at the company's annual retreat. Not as a guest, not as a fill-in, but as a keynote speaker. He looked out at hundreds of faces, some familiar, some new, all waiting to hear the story that had spread far beyond the office. He took a deep breath and spoke. "I used to think my life would be measured by how quiet I could be, by how small I could make myself to survive, but now I know. Your story doesn't have to start loud to end powerfully." He paused, then looked toward the front row, where Aunt Elise sat, tears in her eyes, and his son, Jalen, beaming with pride. "Sometimes," Marcus continued, "you just have to take one step, one ride, one choice to do the right thing when no one's watching, because that one moment might lead you home." The room rose in applause, but Marcus didn't stand for applause. He stood for the kid inside him who once cried in silence, for the father who sacrificed everything, for the woman who kept a letter hidden for decades, and for the future that no longer felt out of reach. This wasn't just a story about a man driving his boss home. This was a story about driving through the fog of forgotten truths and arriving at the place where healing begins, because in the end, he didn't just drive her home. He finally found his way back to his own. Some journeys begin with a map, others begin with a moment you never planned for. For Marcus, it started with a decision so simple, most would have overlooked it. A quiet ride, a silent sacrifice, a man just doing what was right, because that's who he was. But life has a way of honoring those who walk in truth when no one's watching. He didn't chase recognition. He didn't demand titles. He didn't need to be seen. He just kept showing up. And yet somehow, by doing the smallest act of kindness, he unlocked the biggest truth of his life. Because when he drove his drunk boss home that night, he wasn't just protecting her. He was being led to the part of his story he never knew was missing. He thought he had no family, no legacy, just bills, responsibilities, and prayers whispered into silence. But behind closed doors, someone had been holding onto a letter. A photo, a promise, waiting for the day fate would bring him back where he belonged. He didn't find that family by force. He found it through character. And when the truth finally came out, he didn't run from it. He rose into it. Not just for himself, but for his son, for his future, for every single person who's ever felt forgotten, overlooked, or underestimated. Marcus became more than a worker, more than a father, more than a name on an employee badge. He became proof that kindness still matters, that integrity still wins, that the right heart, even in the wrong room, still changes everything. So if you're watching this right now and you feel like life has passed you by, If you feel like your efforts go unnoticed, like your story will never matter, let this be your reminder it does. One act of compassion can change your life. One moment of honesty can open doors you didn't even know existed. One decision to do the right thing can lead you straight into the arms of the truth you've been searching for. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day, when you least expect it, life will look back and say, I saw what you did when no one was clapping, and now it's your turn to shine. Marcus didn't just drive someone home. He drove himself into his destiny, and sometimes that's all it takes to find the home you never knew you were searching for.